One of the great things about the Gospel of John is just the amount of details and depth he gives us in the Gospels. There's one thing where we read it on a literal level and we try to understand it, but as we go deeper and deeper still, we see just how rich the Gospel of St. John really is. He gives us information and he goes deeper and deeper still as we try to uncover not just the surface level meaning, but then also what lies underneath. And so St. John the Evangelist gives us a lot of information to reflect upon and how it applies to our lives today. Now, I invite you, before we begin all of this, if you haven't already, to go to studymyfaith.com to learn more, or you can just subscribe on this YouTube channel right here. So let's get started. One of the stories in the Gospel of St. John the Evangelist has to do with this Samaritan woman. And I want to analyze the story even much deeper and then apply it to our lives. How is it relevant to us? And what is it exactly between the interaction between Jesus and this woman that is so captivating, so important, to the point where finally at the very end, not just her, but everybody recognized that this is the Christ. So let's go right into it. Now, before we analyze it much deeper, I want to propose one very important question for you. And the question is this. If you think about this gospel in particular, who is this Samaritan woman? Who is she? Does St. John give us a name? Does he give her some background about her? Does he tell us who she is, etc.? Think about all these details. They're very important, right? And then think about how we can be like her too. How do we relate to this Samaritan woman? Are we her? Are we similar to her? Etc., right? So think about those items as we go deeper now. And here, I want to share with you 17 points. 17 points, which we're going to talk about right now. And we're going to break it into two parts so that it's easy for us to really reflect on all of them and digest this 17 points. So number one, right? Jesus travels from Judea to Galilee through Samaria. Now, I always think this is very interesting because Jesus has two options if he wants to travel from Judea to Galilee, right? The easier option is to travel between two mountains. There's a valley, it's called the Jordan River Valley. And on the road, there's a lot of water along the way. Naturally speaking, all travelers should be taking this road. It's just the easier road. But St. John tells us, though, Jesus travels from Judea to Galilee through Samaria. So the question is, for number one, why is he traveling through Samaria? What's the point? Why? When it can be so much easier to take the other road. But as we will soon see, there's a real reason why. It's done on purpose. It's not just, because he wants to, take a more interesting route, right? With more mountains and hills. No, it's not that. It goes much deeper. So I want you to pay attention to that for a moment, and we'll go back to that in a little bit. Now, number two, Jesus has been traveling around for a while, right? So now he's tired. And the setting takes place at Jacob's well. Jacob's well. Does that tell you something? Now, I want to take us back into the Old Testament because when we do so, it does. You see, Jacob and Rachel met at this well when they were both tending sheep. Right? They just happen to meet here at this well, and this well becomes a very important scene, right, for both Jacob and Rachel because eventually they end up in marriage. Now, I think this is really important because, yes, you're in a desert, so, hey, if you want to draw water, you got to draw from this well. So this well here signifies something. There's a unitive aspect, so to speak, right? Kind of like with marriage, as we talk about. The unity of a man and a woman together here, you have Jacob and Rachel. There's a unitive aspect here as well. You see, this is where Jacob met Rachel. So, number three, This reference to the well here, I think, is very important because it takes us back to the time of Jacob. Not only did Jacob meet Rachel here, but I want to draw our attention to something else here as well. As I mentioned, it signifies the unitive aspect. You see, the Jews and Samaritans were together at one point. They were one people, not this versus that, not Jews versus Samaritan. They were one and the same people. But over the course of time, there's this divorce, if you will, right? People separating from each other, the Jews and Samaritan, because the Samaritans took a different route. They separated themselves from God, right? And so here, St. John the Evangelist is telling us something. He's telling us that Jesus is coming to this well to reconcile the people. What was united together and then separated, Jesus comes back to the beginning to bring reconciliation. Right? And this reconciliation is so beautiful because if we think about it, Jesus came to reconcile us as sinners when he died on the cross. Beautiful point. But St. John the Evangelist, he drops the hint here telling us that Jesus comes to reconcile the Jews, Samaritans, and all people together, okay? All of humanity back to God. Point number 4. Think about the time of day that Jesus is there. He travels this long road. He's sitting at this well. It is noontime, St. John the Evangelist tells us. Now think about that for a moment. Noontime. You know, back during this time here, women would go and draw water at the well, but they'll do it only during the early morning or the evening. The reason why is because it gets very hot during the day, so they wouldn't go then. Plus, water is pretty heavy, as you can imagine. And generally speaking, they have this custom, if you will, of going together as a group to draw water together, right? It's a social event. So think about this though. This woman comes here at the middle of the day by herself to draw water. Isn't that a little bit strange, right? Nobody's around, nobody's doing it. Is she ashamed? What's going on, right? So that's point number 4, the time of day, the scene of the setting, so to speak. High noon, Jesus and the Samaritan woman. Now, point number 5 is Jesus then begins to speak about living water. Now, Jesus goes to this well, and it's only natural that he asks, hey, give me a drink, right? He's thirsty, he's been traveling on this road. But then notice how this woman recognized him right away as a Jew. And what's her response? She says, how can you, a Jew, ask me, a Samaritan woman, for a drink? And St. John tells us right there in the gospel, he says, for the Jews and Samaritans have nothing to do with each other, right? Nothing. They don't want to be together. They're separated, so to speak. They will not communicate. So why would Jesus ask this woman then for water? Think about it. Is it just a casual conversation? No. Jesus makes it even clearer. Continue down the verse. He says to her, if you knew the gift of God and who is saying to you, give me a drink, you would have asked him and he would have given you living water. Living water, Jesus speaks of. But as you can see, we move on to the next point, number 6, the significance of the living water. What is this living water? You see, water is a symbol of life. We all need water in order to live and to survive, especially in a desert. Think about it. Without water, it's dry, it's barren, it's going to die. So water symbolizes life. But here Jesus speaks of living water, so it goes even deeper still. Living water. I will give you living water. So how does this woman respond? She says, sir, you don't even have a bucket. And look, the well, the cistern here is deep. How can you draw out this living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us this cistern and he drank from it himself with his children and his flocks? All right, she's asking him. But then notice how Jesus responds. Think about it for a moment. On a literal level, how do you draw water from a well if you have no bucket, right? This woman has a point. But then Jesus is speaking on a much deeper level. You see, Jesus is trying to communicate something beyond water itself. He's talking about living water. Living water. Now, point number 7, and I think this is very important, is the woman's question, who are you? You're this stranger. Are you greater than Jacob? And as we can see already in the Gospel of John, he makes it clear, Jesus is greater than Jacob, much greater, right? The Jews and the Samaritans, this is a very important point, claim Jacob to be their father. Take a look at what the woman says. Our father, Jacob. And the Jews would say the same thing. Jacob is their father. So are you greater than Jacob? But here, what we see is this very interesting common heritage, so to speak. In the Old Testament, Jacob was their father in general. But over the course of time, they separated. So in a sense, Jesus is going back to the beginning where it all started to unite them all together. All right, this is a very important point. Now, point number 8. All right, point number 8, very important. Water as a source of life and living water. Jesus, as I've shared, is not just referencing water on a surface level. He's referring to water, living water, life in abundance, eternal life in spirit, life in creation. So as you can imagine, this woman doesn't understand, and this causes her confusion. So then Jesus goes even further still than to say, everyone who drinks this water that you draw from the well will be thirsty again, this well that Jacob gives to you. But whoever drinks the water I shall give will never thirst. The water I shall give will become in him a spring of water welling up to eternal life. Now, wait a minute. You think about it. Think about a time when you are thirsty. You drink water, and in a couple of hours, you're thirsty again, right? And then you desire this water again. Jesus, though, says, I will give you this water that you will never thirst again. So it confuses the woman even further still, to the point where we go into number 9, where she then finally says, Sir, give me this water, so that I may not be thirsty or have to keep coming back here to this well here to draw water. Give me this water you're talking about. Now think about it. Fair question to ask, right? If Jesus is talking about the water of eternal life, she wants it. But she's not quite understanding the dynamics at work here yet. And so let's pause here for a moment, and then we'll continue on part number 2, where we'll continue through points 10 to 17.